This is the important point we begin on tonight. Trump's legal defense has to account for what is otherwise bizarre behavior towards Putin. Maybe ego becomes a way to draw a line and point to November. But Bob Mueller's investigating how we got to November and why so many people around Donald Trump appeared committed to appeasing Russia. The more Mueller finds efforts at cooperation that do go back 1 year, or this new Washington Post report that goes back 2 years, or years more than that, the more he finds that, the harder it becomes to claim this was all a one-sided Russian cultivation. For more, I'm joined by Eugene Scott, political reporter from the Washington Post, which was breaking some of those stories I mentioned, former Watergate prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks, and former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman. Welcome to you all. Jill, do those dots connect in a way that Mueller would be probing?
They definitely connect. I see a long trail of evidence that points to the Trump campaign and Trump himself and Trump's family, his son and son-in-law, working with the Russians and then concealing it. The failure to disclose all of the meetings from his cabinet members, from his son and son-in-law, are all very suspicious and make me want to know more. It doesn't make me think that there is no collusion. It makes me think that there is support for concluding that there is collusion.
Seth, you have been a federal prosecutor for many years in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. You've also, as I understand, done some criminal defense. A classic criminal defense technique is to say, well, here's a bad thing about the defendant, and it sounds bad, but actually helps explain why he didn't commit a crime. How much of that do you see here in what might be called this ego defense of, oh, yeah, the only reason he doesn't want to talk about Russia or hear the intel briefings is that it insults him and not that there's anything else to it?
Yeah, I think Bob Mueller and his team will see right through that. I mean, Donald Trump refusing to hear intel about the Russians, you know, as a citizen of this country is concerning, obviously, without getting into the national security implications. But one of the reasons why he may not want to hear that evidence or that information from his intelligence community is that he may be required to do something about it. And if essentially he is going to send his intel community off to investigate those things, that investigation may turn up evidence against Donald Trump. In other words, he could be handing the axe to the executioner. And so it's very disconcerting to me as a former federal prosecutor when the President of the United States essentially abdicates his responsibility to look into these kinds of activities.
Yeah, and Eugene, then that connects with Donald Trump describing his recent phone call with Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
With Vladimir Putin. It was great. He said very nice things about what I've done for this country in terms of the economy. Then he said also some negative things in terms of what's going on elsewhere.
Trump good, other things bad.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the president has a history of speaking favorably about Putin, but this is problematic for this country, according to our intelligence agencies, because Russian officials do not see the U.S. as favorably as Trump sees Russia. And this could have serious national security implications because this is not something that our intelligence agencies think will end with the 2016 presidential election.
I want you all to stay with me and to pull on the larger legal thread here. I also want to bring in a former federal prosecutor, James Melendres. He was counsel to the Assistant Attorney General. Good to see you, sir. On this conversation in the legal thread, what does it mean when the Washington Post reporting puts the first Russian contact here potentially a full year earlier than was previously known?
Well, Ari, I think you're right that it's clear that Mueller and his team are investigating what led to the election this November, and that includes this earlier than reported first effort to initiate a meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin by Rob Goldstone. But what strikes me as a former federal prosecutor is what Mueller is investigating that occurred after November. And that is, many of the individuals, or at least two, namely Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos, who either were involved in setting up or trying to broker meetings between the campaign and the Russians, or who had contacts with the Russians, lied about it to the FBI. And both those men, Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos, have now been charged and pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI. People make false statements to the FBI for one or two reasons: to protect themselves or to protect someone else. And so I think what remains to be seen is which of those two options was at play.
And that's all happening, Jill, at the same time that Adam Schiff, who folks recognize as the top Dem on the Russia probe in the House, really waving the flag today. I'll read what he said. "I'm increasingly worried Republicans will shut down the House intel investigation at the end of the month. They've scheduled no witnesses after next Friday, none in 2017. Next week, they scheduled critical witness interviews out of state when we are voting, and no members will be able to ask questions. These witnesses are willing to come to D.C. As you know, Jill, and as our viewers know from following Washington controversies, when it comes out like this in public, it means they've already fought it out in private, with him saying, well, why don't we have the folks in New York come down from New York to D.C., and the Republicans apparently saying no. So it's spilling out in public. Do you see that as at all related to what are escalating attacks on Mueller and this wider feeling that, hard to know exactly why, but over the last 2 weeks, with the Flynn, the Flynn guilty plea coming out, there has been a much more vociferous Republican set of counterattacks?
I think the closer that Mueller gets to the president, and the more he shows that there is crimes that are worth pursuing, the more the Republicans are trying to shut it down. They are trying to divert attention following the Trump model by saying, let's investigate Hillary Clinton, and let's not investigate this. That's typical of the Trump tactics, and the Republicans are falling for it. They are not, they're going to suffer in the same way that happened during the Anita Hill hearings, when witnesses who were available and ready to testify weren't allowed to testify. And we know now that there was a lot of truth that could have been brought forth. The public should be demanding public hearings. A public outcry is what we need here to get the evidence and the facts out. And investigating the Russia collusion, skipping the word collusion with Trump, just what they did to our elections, is essential for our democracy. So we have to be looking at that. And along the way, we should be finding out whether anyone in the Trump team was involved. And there's evidence aplenty of that. We have people who have hidden meetings and have been cooperating with the Russians for a long time. And as Rachel Maddow showed in her special on the dossier, this new evidence that there was an attempt to reach Trump earlier is only proof that the dossier may be correct when it said that they've been trying to reach Trump for many years.
Right.
So
well,
I think it all fits together. And
that parts of it have been verified through public accounts, and parts of it remain either unverified or strenuously denied. And we always try to be careful about that, because it is a long, unfiltered document that's sort of floating on the internet. And Seth, we don't just report anything on the internet. Also, it would take too long, because it's big. There's so much on the internet. Internet joke. Quiet panel. Seth, last question to you. When you look at how Bob Mueller approaches this, on the one hand, he's trying to lead everyone to do their job and stay focused, and they got a lot of interviews. They've had quite a lot of fast work done. On the other hand, since you've been in the federal office in Washington and done some of this work, you can't ignore everything, right? I mean, he's got to be somewhat aware about the calls to oust him growing louder. How, politically, legally, or otherwise, do prosecutors deal with that?
Well, prosecutors, just like everyone else, are human beings, and certainly Bob Mueller and his team are watching the news and hearing the rumors and the things that are being reported. But I will tell you that prosecutors like Bob Mueller, they stay steadfast. They focus on their goal, which is to determine whether there was a crime prior to the election, and whether that crime was, there's an attempt to cover up that crime after the election. And so I think Bob Mueller will continue on his path unabated and follow his mandate to determine whether and to what extent there was any conspiracy or any federal laws violated, and eventually either submit a report to Congress or charge one or more individuals over and above those who have already been charged.
Right, above the 4, which is a lot already. Yeah, you can feel the heat. You can feel the heat a little bit, even though it's winter. Seth Waxman, James Melendres, Jill Wine-Banks, Eugene Scott, thanks for being on our Power Panel. Coming up,